Okay, I guess we can start now. So hello everyone, welcome to the Zero in webinar series. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the GHG accounting for power plant emissions. I guess many of you have already heard about like the new regulations around carbon pricing as well as like the carbon economic value in Indonesia just changed. The new presidential regulation number 110/2025 is basically replacing the previous regulation released during the Jokowi's presidency. There's a lot that was changing. There's also things that remains, and we'll be kind of like talking into like two stage. First, talking about more of the regulatory and like compliance part of the power plant reporting, and Tatwa will be talking about more about the kind of like technicalities and like methodology parts of the GHG accounting for the power plant emissions. I will introduce myself. My name is Cecep Hermawan. I'm a country manager as well as like the GHG expert at Zeroe here in Indonesia, stationed in Jakarta. And I have Tatwa here, who's also like part of Zeroe as our kind of like GHG accounting and reporting specialist. Tatwa is currently doing his PhD in Belgium, and he's been helping like a lot of clients throughout his career and their sustainability journey, whether it's for the company that are just starting or like already advanced within their kind of like stage of sustainability. So I guess we will be presenting like a few slides, but if there's like question throughout the way, please do not hesitate to just like click like on the question or like through chat. You can send your question about like everything related to regulation or like methodology. So I guess on today's session, we'll be talking about like two parts. The first is about the regulatory and compliance landscape for IPP, especially for the independent power producer, in terms of like what they have to do in terms of their GHG inventory, what they need to report and such. And then also like the key methodological challenge that often faced by these companies when they are trying to adhere to like government compliance. So as a background, like I've been talking to a lot of the IPP companies, also some of them are present here as well, and talking about like their challenges, their kind of like a huge gap in terms of like data. There needs to have like a really continuous support when it comes to like compliances and how they're looking for like kind of like solutions partner, or they're looking for like consulting partner that's going to help them, or like giving them like some kind of internal capacity that allows them to always follow compliance without having to kind of like cost them too much money in terms of like how much they spend. So I guess the first segment is about like regulatory compliance. I guess like we can talk about it into like three perspectives. First, of course, we have the newly updated presidential regulations that kind of like about carbon pricing as well as the GHG inventory control, which I think if we are to say like what happened or like what changes, I guess like the first thing, of course, the previous regulation, the presidential regulation number 98 2021 is revoked. And then of course, like there is also like a clauses about like how carbon trading can proceed without waiting for the NDCs. There's also new the carbon economic value instrument has now kind of like explicitly classified into four buckets. First is carbon trading. Second is the result-based payment. The more clarity around like carbon levies and taxes, and also like various kind of other instrument that is like really depends on like the sector that we are talking about. Of course, kind of like in terms of like a power sector, we know that this is the high priority industry for the government to decarbonize, because it accounts for almost like 40% of our national GHG inventory. So the regulations around this has been kind of like enforced since like in the past few years. I guess there's not much changing when it comes to like what IPP need to be doing in terms of compliance. It's all about like counting your emissions, especially from your plant operations. And one things that maybe we're still gonna change is the methodology and the kind of like the system that is provided by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. That will still be changing, because like the derivative regulation from this presidential regulation is still pending from the ministerial level. There is like some mentions about the new units that is also regulated by the OJK, the Financial Authority, and also like how kind of like the carbon trading, carbon offset can be used, or like how kind of like all of the current changes in Indonesia carbon market is kind of like going to affect the Indonesia power sector. For now, I would say it's still kind of like unclear, but we can see the directions there to have like a good kind of like rules of thumb, kind of, or the game rule about like how or like or when company can kind of like utilize carbon offset like throughout the upcoming years. There is more regulations coming in. The OJK will have their kind of like second green taxonomy instrument that will kind of like more or less also affect companies in power sectors. And when it comes to like its compliance, I guess the regulation hasn't changed because there is no new regulation yet from the Ministry of Energy. So the company still has to kind of like submit their kind of like monitoring or like reporting planning for next year by the end of the year. They still have to kind of like update or like report their GHG inventory for the previous year in January, and also like kind of like submit their final report by April. So I guess there's the detail of technicality is not changing there, but I guess there's like a lot to expect because of this new regulation that's just being signed by the new president. So, and I guess the next part is, of course, about like all the various push and pull factor to decarbonize in Indonesia, which I think now there is more incentive to decarbonize the power sectors. There's like increase in public awareness. There's like more companies would like to use the renewable energy. There's like technological advancement when it comes to like a cheaper technology, the utilization of AI and like Internet of Things to kind of like control the energy efficiency within the plant operations. There is more fund mechanism or like blended finance mechanism to kind of like funding your decarbonization project. I know there's like some cool company out there who's been investing a lot of their money into like their new and renewable power plant. They are transitioning away from like coal power plant into renewable power plant because all of this kind of like new push and pull factor that's coming out from the financing side. There's also, I guess, more of the market and investment pressure. I guess like when you try to find like funding from like overseas bank, I think one thing that I know for sure, for example, BNP Paribas, they are no longer going to finance like coal-based power plant. And I know that a company, banks like DBS or like OCBC as well, or like Maybank also like start to kind of like implementing the regulations like against financing in coal related industries or coal related business. In Indonesia, we heard a lot about like how state-owned bank like BNI, Mandiri, as well as like the private bank like HSBC are start to like campaigning a lot against like non-renewable financings, and more campaigning about like how to improve like the kind of like green portfolio within their financing part. So I guess one of the big part we can say we can say there's like a regulatory push that kind of like pushing the company like to kind of like decarbonize faster. Otherwise, you will lose a lot of money in terms of like the cost that's coming out from the taxes or like the levies. And there's also like kind of like a pull factor as well coming out from your markets, coming out from the users as well, coming out from like also a global market, global investor to do it. So I guess it's kind of like a little brief of like on the regulatory landscape. So I guess I'll kind of like hand it over to Tatwa to talk more about like the technical part.
Yeah, thank you, Cecep, for introducing the background of the issue. So I think now the attendees will move on to the technicalities of the power sectors. Of course, first of all, we'll open it by exploring the supply chain emissions that you would have within your organizations. Of course, your emission would majorly come from the power plant emissions. As you can see here, we indicate with the different size of the circle with blue, green, and orange colors, indicating scope 1, 2, and scope 3. So the big blue circle here corresponds to the big emissions that you would have in the power plant. But of course, when we talk about power plant, we also talk about um, your potential upstream supply chain, including your materials or energy supply as main of the factors, and also the operational process from your organizations or offices. As well as later on in the downstream pathway, you would have emissions from transmission, distributions, as well as the supply and energy electricity services to your end user. But then again, the big chunk of emission would come from the power plant activities, especially if you are still in non-renewable majority power sector. You would have more than 90% of emission coming only from your scope 1 stationary combustions. The remaining emissions would come from the scope 3, especially the upstream emissions of your energy source. So as simple as if you use coal or if you use diesel, the emissions to produce the coal and the diesel will be part of your emissions as well in the scope 3, but it will be the biggest chunk of your scope 3. The other emission will correspond to more or less than 1%. But again, the majority emissions will only come from the stationary combustion um, alone. So that is why it is very important to realize the urgency of measuring these emissions correctly, which is for Indonesia, the energy sector. So by per se, the stationary combustion of the IPP correspond to almost 40% of national GHG inventory, in which it is dominated by the high shares of non-renewable energy mix, as well as because of this reason, it is clearly regulated by several ministerial regulations, including what we will discuss today about the Permen SDM 2022, and also in Applegatrik that the IPP companies have been using for several years already to store your emissions annually. So the idea of all of these, be it from the government point of view and also from the global point of view, we really want to see how the power plant sectors can move forward from only voluntary emission accounting to a compliance level, and even further later on in the future to use your emission profile as a performance-based mechanism that will be used, for example, to generate a carbon cap and carbon tax mechanisms based on that. So for all sector it will be the same, but for power sector it will be very urgently be applied due to the significance of your emissions and its impact to the whole decarbonization process in general. So moving to Applegatrik, I think this is the slide that I believe the audience might even probably know better, because you are the one who actually have been using it, but we will more or less walk you through it. So the Applegatrik stands for the Aplikasi Penghitungan dan Pelaporan Emisi Ketenagalistrikan, or basically in English, the application to measure and report the emissions from the electricity power sector. And the dedicated user, of course, it's self-explanatory. So everyone that is working to produce the electricity, be it in Indonesia, PLN, and its affiliated companies, the IPP itself that is connected to PLN, a PPU, and also private company with captive power. If you have a company that utilize your own, for example, PLTU to generate your own electricity source. So the reporting flow through Applegatrik to ensure that all the emissions from the electricity utilities are recorded well and consistent. So there are different layers of flow that will be occurring, starting from the operational level where the calculation and reporting emissions happen here, and then after that you will go through certain level of validation and verification, be it from, for example, your parent or principal company that will be later on reported to KSDM and PLN. to validate it in the national grid system until the validation and verification of the data that you have that will be done in KSDM. Until at the end of the day, your data will be cross-checked by KLHK as well to be used as national emission inventory prior to UNFCCC reporting that will be presented and updated every a few years. So the whole data will be, to put in context, the data that you put in the system of Applegatrik will determine the national emission. So imagine how important your data would be. And that's why it's very important to ensure that you have a good reliability of the data that you put in the system, because at the end of the day, this will determine the national importance as well as determine your own company's emissions accuracy. But we realized that to measure the emission in power sectors, which seems to be straightforward because we are measuring the of combustion of fuels, but there might be some challenges that we commonly see from the IPP companies. First of all, it's about inconsistent data. Sometimes the data are challenging to collect, especially without CEMS or continuous emission monitoring system. In some cases, especially if you're using a coal as the power source, there might be inconsistent lab results, which leads to also not accurate data because you would have incorrect oxidation factor, incorrect carbon content, and so on and so forth, and correct net calorific value that will, at the end of the day, make your emission accounting twisted. So this is also a challenge that is commonly faced by the company, as well as if you even have a CMS calibration, sometimes the lack of internal QA or QC might also impacting your collected data. So basically saying the first group of challenge is about the data, how the data will play a big power role in the emission calculation, because a twisted data in power sector might affect to millions of tons CO2 equivalent of gap or differences. So to be sure that to have consistent data is very important. And then after that, depending on how you possess your emission factors, you might also find some issues in utilizing emission calculation, especially if you don't know which emission or global warming potential that might be accurate for your calculation. For example, for the diesel-based power generation, you might have to choose which type of diesel that you use for your emissions that will determine the emission of CO2, methane, and also the nitrous oxide. So choosing emission factor can also be challenging, and this is commonly happen not only in power sector but also in the other sector. And talking specifically about Applegatrik, this is from Zeroe's own experience and perspective. We found that the Applegatrik system even have some sort of its own uniqueness in terms of calculation. You might also already realize about this, that there are several rounding up and final numbering that the system has. So even if you have we have one partner before that have calculated their own emissions, but when they upload it to the Applegatrik, the version from Applegatrik is a bit different from what they did, which makes a problem in terms of validation, because several percent of error might be an issue in terms of this kind of national submission system. So that is why it's very important as well for you to ensure that you are aware of how the full calculation in Applegatrik is being done. Directly from that last sentence that I just said, so at the end of the day, the proper accounting will give you license to operate and be a foundation for future mechanisms that will be there, either carbon market, carbon tax, and so on and so forth. So this is very important part. The calculation part for power sector is becoming more urgent than ever. The main guidelines in Indonesia, of course, there are two. They stated clearly that IPCC is still the main guideline. accompanied with the technical guidance of using the Applegatrik. There you will know all the calculation information, mechanisms, the flow, and so on and so forth. The covered emissions are the main stars of the GHG, so the CO2, the methane, and also the nitrous oxide. The input data that you would have to put, there are several, but majorly fuel consumption, and then fuel characteristics. So the fuel consumption can be in liter, in tons, depending on the type of fuel that you're using. And then the characteristic, which is very important to ensure that we can understand well the emission calculation. Usually the information required are the NCV, the net calorific value, the carbon content, and also the oxidation factor. And then some other output are the plant output and also operating hours. All of these combined will get us to the activity data of how much energy is being generated, for example. Then it will be also possible to use different tier of emission factors. The best one is, of course, by using direct monitoring. So to know, for example, the monthly level of the NCV or the carbon content and the oxidation factor. Well, oxidation factor is usually same, but usually the net calorific value or the carbon content might be different from the type of, for example, oil that you use. But even if we don't have this, we can always start with tier one or default factors by using the commonly used emission factors for certain fuels. So this can be done. The output for us, the IPP companies, will be your absolute emissions. Of course, from the absolute emissions, it can be generated into emission intensity. So how much emissions CO2 equivalent per megawatt hours of electricity, for example. This intensity, you might already aware that this becomes the scope 2 factor, emission factors for user. For example, if I am your customer of your IPP, if you have emission intensity of 0.7 kilogram CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hours, then that is the emission factors that I will use to measure my scope 2. So this is also another convincing point that calculating these emissions of IPP might be very influential to different sectors, especially the users of the electricity. And then before I pass it on to Cecep, I'd like to emphasize again that data management is indeed later on becoming the key factors for IPP. So you can always start, this is a journey, but you can start by having a centralized data. It's very important to have consistent data, as I've already mentioned several times in the previous slides. And then uniformity in format is also important to ensure that the format of your data calculation is similar over the time, because in Applegatrik, it is important to measure the emissions per month. So of course, having a similar calculation format is important. And having centralized data will make it easy for you in consolidating different data that you might have, for example, from different energy source. And then number two is correct and proper conversion usage to ensure to use an up-to-date conversion, because if you have a wrong version, you will have invalid results, invalid validation, and so on and so forth. And this requires a continuous record keeping. And then after that, it's also important to move to evidence trailing to make sure that you can easily trace your data to its primary source, especially in electricity related data. You can match your calculate. It's very important for you to be able to match your calculated data with the data that is collected from its primary source, for example, from the meter of the power plant itself. This will ensure the company from any potential risk of validation and audit before doing the Applegatrik. And then, of course, the final thing is to final check before reporting to create a guarantee that will create a guarantee of data consistency between the internal system and Applegatrik. So you won't have not even 2% of errors, but exactly the same number, the same decimal, because you know how Applegatrik will work on the calculation. This will reduce a lot a risk of data rejection, because we heard a lot that some companies would have to do again the calculation because the calculation that they present is not similar with how the calculation in Applegatrik should be. So I think, Chep, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you would like to present this, so I'm passing this one to you again.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Tato, for like quite a comprehensive view about like how the methodology and like how it works when it comes to like the accounting emissions from power plant. So, but basically, like when it comes to like all of this compliance, all of this regulation coming out from the government, especially for power sector, how verifications kind of like plays an important role, because like the accepted report is only the one that's verified by third parties. Maybe like in Indonesia, there's like a lot of player in terms of the verification. We know maybe like SGS, Truth North, Scofindo, like or other kind of like third-party verificators. They play a big role for all of the power plants. So I just want to maybe like highlight like kind of like two things of like what verifiers actually look into like your report. First is of course evidence map. You have to kind of like you need to be able to kind of like trace all of your data, all of your number into its primary sources, whether it's like your chums or like your kind of like manifest in terms of like fuel or like whatever it is. You have to be able to prove like how much that you are using throughout the year to ensure that the emission that you are reported is kind of like 99% accurate, so to say. You also need to kind of like clearly like put a transparency around like your methodology. We know that the methodology has been kind of like dictated by the minister as well. That's based on the IPCC methodology. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, you have to give like super clear clarity about like how your kind of like comes to your final numbers. And of course, like the sampling documentation, you wouldn't know like which part of the documentation that we're gonna be asked by the verification company or verification agency. So you have to kind of like make sure that everything is ready. And in Zero, what we're doing is basically like we're providing like all of this kind of like solution as a package within your system. We try to kind of like put an automation into like how your data is being collected through the primary sources, and also how verifier, whoever your verifier ours will be able to kind of like look into your data, look into your methodology, and look into like what's your primary sources are, and like all of the required kind of like checklists in terms of like your verification. So we help in that. And beyond the power sector, like this kind of systems of like traceable and auditable carbon emissions reporting and is kind of like available for all industries out there. I saw some of you are coming from like quite a diverse industry here, manufacturing and all that. No worries. We also provide like a quite similar comprehensive service to like various kind of industries as well. So, and I guess like how Zero can provide an accurate and credible data for IPPs GHG inventory is simply because you can imagine that Zero as a company, we as a service, we are like a playground where companies, wherever you're coming from, IPPs, manufacturing companies, or land management companies, or like palm oil or whatever, you will be able to kind of like create your entire sustainability pillars, sustainability playground, sustainability assets within Zero, and we'll be able to kind of like generate you the report that's required by your compliance. For example, if you want to generate the report based on the Applegatrik rules, we'll be able to kind of like help you out to generate a number and like kind of like a good traceability for your verification process. And if you are maybe like a publicly listed company, we'll be able to kind of like help you in generating the report that's in compliance with the materiality assessment, whether it's based on GRI, IFRS, whether you are doing like a single materiality assessment or double materiality assessment, it doesn't matter. We'll be able to kind of like help you guys out in like doing that and like generating the required report for you. And it also include also the data validation, the audit log into your systems, and also the maintenance of methodology and emission factor that is being utilized throughout your systems. So that's basically like how I guess like how I think it's really important for a company to own the entire project by themselves when it comes to like GH inventory, because you are the one who kind of like operating your business. You are the one who kind of like really understand what it means to kind of like operate a power plant, what it means to like operate a manufacturing company maybe or something like that, and kind of like internalizing and like building the internal capacity in the GH accounting process through like this kind of system will kind of like give you like a lot of like benefit or like value adding for your company and for your people as well. And of course, there's also like a benefit when it comes to like compliance. You will kind of like on-time verification and such. That is something that we are kind of like push company to also learn and adapt throughout the time as well. New regulation always coming in. It's always hard to learn like new regulations sometimes, and we kind of like here to kind of like help you guys and like assist you to kind of like kind of go beyond like just compliance. So I guess that's kind of like sums up like my presentations. I guess that like some question that's was being shared. So I guess I'll check for questions. So I guess I have like first question regarding methodology. So that one is like maybe like a question for you. So a question is basically saying like, is it really make a difference between like choosing the tier 1 methodology to tier 2 or tier 3 methodology? Is there any implication, or like is there like a kind of like implication if a company are keep only using tier 1 throughout the reporting process?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. That's a very excellent question. So I think first of all, I like to assure everyone, because I think if looking at the attendees, we also have people from different organizations as well outside of the power sector. So this is a general questions that I think will be applied as well to every one of you. So the answer is of course, using a higher tier is way better in terms of capturing your accuracy in emissions of your organizations. So having your own version, let's say in bracket, your own version of emission factors or intensity is way better than using the database that is published by some government or some LCA-based organizations, because they are capturing different average level data. So in short, yes, having a higher tier is obviously better and is obviously capturing a higher accuracy level of your emissions accounting, but it doesn't mean that tier 1 is bad. It's not bad at all. It's still a good thing to do. It's usually done to kickstart your emission accounting. So using tier 1, for example, using a global database like, for example, DEFRA or EPA, or in Indonesia, we also have the typical emission factors that come from different sectors. It's still okay, because then you can start to capture your emissions, and then you will know, for example, oh, these are the emissions that becomes my major emissions. Maybe I should start to look forward to improve the quality of the tier emission factors that I have. So from there, you can start to prioritize which type of emission that you would like to focus on, because generating your emissions into the higher tier might also cause you to do more in terms of um, the improvement of your data quality and so on and so forth. So it's also it's important to know first which emissions that you would like, or which activity that you would like to focus on to have a better tier. So in IPP also the same. So of course it's always nice to have your primary data of lab report and so on and so forth. But if you're just starting and you don't have that one yet, for different energy that you use in your power plant, we already have different amount of data source to use as a tier 1 emission factors. So you can start with that, and then moving forward slowly but sure to determine your carbon content, to determine your NCV, and so on and so forth, to know at the end of the day what is your higher tier or like tier 3 emission factors. I think that's my take, Chap. It's very important to notice that it's not bad to have tier 1, because it's a part of the journey. Anyway, I hope you agree with that as well, Chap.
All right. We have like two more questions now. So first is from this like related to, I guess I will answer this. In what ways have your company's IT capabilities or digital transformation efforts contribute to reducing carbon emissions? So I guess like Zero is basically we kind of like helps company in terms of like building their internal capacity when it comes to sustainability efforts. We kind of like help them to own the sustainability project by themselves, and our tools is basically helps company to kind of like have a live view or like full control towards their operations in relation to the emissions that they kind of like emit. So for example, this month's operation contribute to like 2,000 tons of emissions, while I have, for example, a target of kind of like reducing 10% of my emission throughout the year. So we kind of like give like a clear live perspective of how much or like how the performance of their company in relations to like sustainability. So they will be able to kind of like create plan ahead of time to control the emission that they produce. For example, if it's January until June, they have been using a lot of coal-based fuel for power plant or for the manufacturing operations. Then maybe for the remaining of the year, because they already see the kind of like the balance of emission that they provide, they emit until June. For the remaining of the year, they can switch into natural gas to kind of like reduce the emissions that they emit for the rest of the year. I know there are like some manufacturing companies in Bandung. I'm from Bandung. There's like some manufacturing companies in Bandung who kind of like plays around with this kind of like fuel balance. So January to March, they are using coal. Then they change into natural gas. They activate some of their electricity-based production line, or they change again to basically kind of like manage and balance out the emission that they emit kind of like in a particular year that is based on their trajectories. So, and we, Zero as a company, we help them to basically control and like manage or like to plan out like the emissions that's being emitted, and also plan ahead like what's your decarbonization look like, what is the best way to kind of like reduce your emissions, how much it will require to invest in decarbonization strategy or decarbonization initiative based on your company's characteristics. So we help the companies out in that way. So we are kind of like your digital assistants, so to say, to provide you like a clear pathway towards your net zero goals. So, and we're not just like a software company, we're also like filled with like kind of like an expert in terms of like the GHG expertise, filled by a researcher who are kind of like excited about like decarbonizations. So we try to actually be moving ourselves as a researcher or like as a consultant or like as an expert, because we want company to have like internal capacity like to manage, to control, and to kind of like control their decarbonization effort for in a long-term perspective. I guess I hope that answered uh, your questions. There's also more questions about methodology. What about fugitive emissions from geothermal power plant? Is it already reported in Applegatrik?
Yeah, I think I want to take that one. This is a very interesting question. Thank you, Pak Bagus, for asking this question. So I think for the rest of the audience, to ensure that we have some level of understanding what he meant by NCG is non-condensable gas. So imagine if you Google geothermal power plant, you would see like some clouds coming out from the soil. That's the gas that he was referring to. The gas it's coming from the process of geothermal, that because of some technical reason, especially because of different pressures that the gas have compared to the pressure that's being used in the geothermal power plant itself, these part of gases has to be vented out or released to the atmosphere. Why is it very valid questions? Is because the NCG itself usually contain more than 90% of CO2. So depending on the size of the gas that they vented, of course, it might be major emissions that is calculated as fugitive emissions. Again, maybe to explain a bit of the technical terms, the fugitive emissions are the emissions that are intentionally or unintentionally release because of the natural process of your emission business. For example, in this geothermal, because of your because you need to produce the energy, you need to fan out some of the gases, which comes as the NCG. So in Applegatrik, it's also reported because they require us to report the direct emissions. So I think for geothermal power plant, it's very important for you to know how much CO2 content in the NCG, because the rest are usually like H2S, which is not GHG, so you don't have to report that. But which part of it is mostly contain CO2, whether it's like 90%, 92%, and so on and so forth, and then multiplying with the like the amount or the ppm or the flow of the gas that is coming out from your power plant, you can report that as your CO2 emissions in Applegatrik. I believe they have it as well in their system for you to measure that as well. That is my take, Chap. I hope it answers your question. Bagus, and indeed is very accurate, relevant question to ask.
Okay, amazing. There's like one question that was sent to me ahead of time through email. So for plants with CHEMS, when do you rely on measure CO2 versus calculation-based estimate? And how do you document method selections?
Sorry, Chap, could you repeat?
For plants with CHEMS, when do you rely on measure CO2
CHEMS
versus calculation-based estimate?
Yeah, I think again, CMS, it will generate a proper trend. It will generate the better data granularity. So of course, the different with using average data would be to have a higher accuracy. I hope I catch the question clearly, or what was the main question was checked.
So if the company has CHEMS, do they also do they have to always use the measure CO2 as the source of kind of like their reported data, or can they also like use the calculation-based estimate?
I think if you have CHEMS, it's way better to use the CHEMS data to capture your CO2 data, because then you would have definitely reflecting more accuracy in terms of the fluctuation of your energy generation. So I think it goes without saying that using CHEMS is way better at this stage. Yeah, I hope you agree with that. Of course, if you tend to have different points on that.
Yeah, of course I agree. Yep. Okay. Is there any more questions from the audience before we kind of like close the sessions? I'll give you guys a few seconds. If there's like more questions, you can also like send your questions to me, chechep@zero.io, and I will answer through email, or we can also have discussions to talk about how we can help you in your company, or like whatever you want to do with us. Feel free to kind of like reach out to me through LinkedIn or email or whatever. So I guess that's kind of like we come to the end of the session. So thank you so much, everyone who's been listening for the past kind of like 15 minutes. It's been like quite a fruitful discussion. It's like it's always good to kind of like talk about like the current trend of sustainability in Indonesia and how we can help you guys. Thank you so much for coming. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any more questions, or if you have kind of like things that you want to discuss in terms of like how Zeroe can help you in your sustainability journey. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming, and see you on the next episode. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.